With the recent news of the Team Fortress Source 2 project getting an official DMCA by Valve, the specific incident has actually garnered a lot of coverage in relation to Valve taking out the time to do this, and also, as well, throwing S&box into the limelight for only a small amount of it. While there is a good amount of people who do know about S&box, this is also a very weird incident where a ton of people whom probably never heard about S&box get to know what it is, so of course, welcome. But what does this entire incident say more about both Valve and also S&box as a whole? Well, a while back I made a video bringing up a topic about copyright and how it'll probably be a large problem within S&box. Some folks seem to get upset at the idea that this wouldn't make sense to do in S&box, since if it's going to be a spiritual successor to Garry's mod, the least it would do is allow the one thing that actually helped it bring it up to its legendary status, which is the support of Valve-related games being added into the game itself through mounting. After all, while the game is made within the Source 2 engine, it seems like a lot has changed over the last year or so with the game itself, becoming more of its own engine as it's being forked from Half-Life Alyx version of Source 2 into what it is now. But the entire topic I spoke within that video was more along the lines of copyright content is going to be a problem because of Facepunch's policy on IPs, etc. Now remember, S&box is a separate game and not a mod. It's stated within the official DMC takedown by Valve on the GitHub page, TF2 assets have been ported into Source 2 without permission and are being redistributed by Amper Software in a game mode for Facepunch's S&box. Facepunch has not licensed any Valve assets for S&box. The unauthorized porting and redistributing of Valve's assets without a license violates Valve's IP. I also interviewed Shimona Hihi, one of the many awesome S&box community mappers, as we talked more about Half-Life assets being in S&box in this interview, with Shimona stating,
I know Garry had actually mentioned he was considering licensing the Half-Life Alyx assets as part of the S&box release that you could use them to build it. He decided against it ultimately for two reasons, and the reasons that he posted, number one was what we discussed, where he didn't want people to feel like this is what S&box should look like, these are the assets that came with it, this is what you should. So that was number one. And number two is that Valve wanted, I think, another 10% of all his sales as part of their royalty fees for using their assets. And so I think he was saying that they already take 30%, so that would be a 40% cut for them, and he was he's not willing to do that. So so I think it ends up actually being a blessing. And this was actually a topic that was discussed quite a bit over the first year. People from both sides saying you should put the Alyx assets in, people saying on the other side that you shouldn't. They're developing their own core set of assets. I know that Facepunch has hired people so that when they release it, that people can just right off the bat use what comes with them. But temporarily, they've been putting in the Rust assets as sort of placeholders so that we can at least have something to use. I am glad ultimately, though, that they decided to not take on the Half-Life Alyx assets, as I think that's going to allow for a lot more artistic expression and creativity.
With this new DMC takedown, we get an official response directly from Valve stating the obvious, as Garry himself also mentioned on Twitter. I think while it's maybe out of character for Valve to take down fan projects like this, it's hardly surprising when you have their entire game uploaded. I somehow don't think the old Valve would let anyone port Half-Life to another engine and host it all publicly either. S&box doesn't have a license to use Valve's content, only the engine. It's not a mod, it's not Gmod. We didn't want to commit a chunk of profit so early in development when we don't even know what the final product will look like. Amper did a really great job porting and making this all work. Sadly, it was going to be all broken next week with the scene system update, so at least this saves them the job of updating to be compatible. So this obviously was bound to happen, as I think many folks were unsure exactly what would happen with this since the game started development. It does make sense that Valve does want to protect their IPs, even knowing that majority of their game catalog is based off of the ideas of originally stemmed from mods becoming their own individual games that we now know and love. Of course, this has started a debate and uproar between folks within the Source community, as Valve turns into a very familiar and new lane that seems to join the club with Nintendo. But that's just how business and copyright law is. While this does seem more heavier on the TF2 community as the game continues to get neglected by Valve, and as community mod projects continue to shut down, it's very obvious that Valve is not the same anymore. What this means for S&box is the usage of IPs that either stem from Valve or even use IPs from other games, shows, and more, as it's going to be incredibly interesting to see how the perception of S&box will actually look like. Plus, this all relies solely on copyright law and games that would even be made on platforms like S&box if they would even exist. While I did hope that there would be some sort of response officially from Facepunch in relation to the topic, It seems like we got a much bigger response directly from Valve themselves, as this does relate to it. And in short, this tells us a lot more not only about just Valve as it stands today as a company, but also how S&box and Facepunch will deal with these same issues in an effort to uphold Facepunch's IP policies as a whole. If you want to know everything more about S&box within 11 minutes or less, feel free to check out this video right here. Thanks for watching.